Hey everyone, I'm Gabriel Porras. In January of 2012, things were much different than they are now in the large Northern California city of Stockton. In just 6 months, the city of 292,000 would jump into national headlines declaring bankruptcy, being the largest metropolitan city in the nation at the time to do so, and beginning an era of political instability and national attention, not usually for good reasons. However, that month, January of 2012, is where a new journey began for Eric Jones, the city of Stockton's 49th police chief, who had already been on the force for nearly 20 years before being given the title of chief. During his March swearing-in ceremony, the newly minted 40-year-old chief at the time said that he was looking to bring stability and longevity. Well, almost a decade later, Chief Eric Jones is still here and joined us for a sit-down interview via Zoom to talk about his time as chief ahead of his retirement in January, an announcement which he made back in September. Thank you for taking the time to speak with us today, Chief. We're here just days before your planned retirement, and it's, I'm sure, been a busy past 4 months since you announced that. What's going through your mind now as it gets closer and closer, and how have these past few months been like for you since that announcement?
Yes, it's certainly been surreal, and it's been bittersweet because I definitely will miss this place. I'll miss the staff here, and I'll miss working with the community members in the capacity as chief. I've had a lot of challenges. Our department has over the years. I've been with the department for nearly 3 decades, so seen a lot, experienced a lot. And so to leave something that so well and you've done for so long, the next chapter of my life I'm excited about, but it's also I'm going to miss this work and this place very much.
I asked Jones about those challenges over the years, but first, what led to his decision to retire? And what led up to your decision and ultimately deciding that now is your time?
Yeah, so I think it's time for me to move into my next chapter, which I'm going to probably keep working in just a different capacity, but I haven't decided yet. But really, the decision came down to I committed to doing about 10 years of police chief when I promoted to that rank, and 10 years in such a role is a long time, especially it's such a 24/7 job, and you have to be on all the time. So really just a combination of reasons, mostly for personal reasons, but also for the department to continue to move into its next chapter, I think is important as well.
When Jones first started, he was tasked with guiding the city's largest department in both staffing and funding through a bankruptcy. How did it feel to join the department as chief at that time?
Yes, so I grew up through the ranks here at Stockton Police Department. I started as a young officer, working black and white patrol car, and then moved up, just had various assignments over the years. And when I did take over as police chief in March of 2012, that was a very difficult time for our department, for our community. We were going into bankruptcy. At that time, the largest American city to declare bankruptcy. We had some very low staffing, some of the lowest staffing numbers we'd had, and also violent crime was very high rate. So there were a lot of things going on. So I knew that this was going to be a very big challenge. But really, what helped me get through it is the department. We were very resilient. My command team and others really rallied together. And so I really credit getting through those difficult times. I credit to the police department staff here, as well as the great community members that I've forged some outstanding relationships with.
And as you mentioned there, it's important to note that in 2012, bankruptcy was not the only issue facing the department. That would also go down as Stockton's deadliest year with 71 homicides, an all-time record. That's also the year that Forbes ranked Stockton as the 8th most dangerous city in the U.S., a headline that for people like me who grew up in the town, knew very well. How'd you see your role as police chief during that time when crime was so high, and even in times after that when crime also started to tick up?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think my role is to lead this police department through very challenging times. And so really the way I viewed that was to work on internal morale, and also while at the same time really bridging gaps between the police department and community. As we went into 2 years of fiscal emergency prior to bankruptcy, We really, stopped going to a lot of types of police calls. Our staffing was so low, we really couldn't go to community meetings we used to. But I realized, especially when community members came forward and said, what can we do to work with you? We really changed a lot of the work we did and the way we did it to really rely upon community members more than we normally would have. And it was beneficial. It was helpful. So I just felt it was my role again to lead, sort of like it was like a ship in stormy waters that we had to navigate through multiple types of storms. And my responsibility was to plot the course and navigate our department through that time.
One of Jones's solutions in 2012, a community response team. Still in operation, the team mixes community relations and trust building with patrols and undercover work to prevent and respond to crimes, usually focusing on gang violence in hotspot areas. The team has reshaped the way the police department operates. How important was that in curbing crime, especially when it comes to gangs, and given the undercover work that is done by that team? Is that still a program that you think the city still needs years later?
Yes, and it will continue and has continued actually to evolve over the years. At the time we formed the team, it was very similar to what we had years before the CRT, Community Response Team, started. We had something called the Gang Street Enforcement Team, GSET. Right before I formed CRT, we had no real proactive units. We were just, candidly, we were 911 responders. I mean, we just responded to 911 calls mostly. And we didn't have a unit that was out really proactively working both undercover and sometimes in black and white patrol cars as well, working on the illegal guns out on the street and the gang retaliation shootings we were having. We didn't have a proactive team that was operating. And so that's why I created the CRT team. And again, it's evolved over time and will continue to. One thing I've learned is to really, especially when a unit is that proactive and are making a lot of arrests, that team really has to be meeting with community members also to ensure they're taking as balanced of approach as possible.
His time in office has covered a number of big incidents. One of the first was a Bank of the West robbery, hostage-taking, and shootout where a hostage was killed by police bullets. But there have also been several officer-involved shootings which have torn apart the community in some ways. Just recently, the Devin Carter incident, which resulted in indictments of former officers for allegedly assaulting a teen while conducting an arrest. How have those incidents affected you as a chief of police?
Yes, so you just mentioned there have been a lot of challenges, from controversial incidents to tragedies, and so each of them really tests my ability to lead the department. Sometimes I have to break difficult news to family members. Sometimes I have to present flags to those who have lost their loved one. Our officer involved incidents where we've lost some officers in the line of duty. Saying very difficult news at media conferences. I mean, those things are, they're part of the job. They take a toll on you. But I think what's important is just having a support network with other chiefs, family, good friends within the department as well to help, guide through those difficult times.
You've had to bury your officers twice now. Officer Scott Hewell, who died in a car crash on duty in 2014, and of course Officer Jimmy Inn, who was shot by a suspect in May of this year. Do you see any way that those deaths could have been prevented on the police department angle, and how does that wear on you, now?
Yeah, we're always looking at what we could have done better. Maybe look at new practices and policies. I always, whenever an officer is injured or killed in the line of duty, the first thing I think of course, is sorrow and getting through the tragedy, but then also wondering, is there something, as police chief, something I can do? Is there perhaps a policy? Is there more training that has to be done? Going back to the Bank of the West incident, where Misty Holt Singh's life was so tragically taken. I asked for an outside entity, the National Police Foundation, to come in and do an assessment and review and see if there were any best practices. So, if we go specifically to the Jimmy Inn, our most recent tragedy, I do have to say both to this day, we're still reviewing it, and we'll look at anything that, maybe the department could do better. But Jimmy Inn did everything right based on what he had available to him and the training. there's just sometimes you can do everything correct and horrible outcomes still occur. But we do, and it is my responsibility, and it will be my predecessor's responsibility to make sure that we do reviews, and that's part of our transparency, holding ourselves accountable, and making sure we're always looking for improvements where we're able to.
And another issue during your tenure has also been staffing. You've of course increased that since you've been in office. Do you think the police department has enough staffing right now to both prevent and respond to crime in the city accurately?
I am concerned about our staffing numbers, and we did build them up, over 100 additional officer positions over the last decade as part of Measure A. And we were finally getting up into some some of the highest numbers we'd seen, really around close to 480 officers, which I still believe is, even that number is not enough to give Stockton what it really deserves. But I do understand especially when the city goes through bankruptcy, there's only so much funding there. But I would like to see, well, I agree with Dr. Anthony Braga's report that he did a number of years ago. And really, we need more like 600 officers to do the type of work we should be doing. But I'll say too, it's not just about the number of officers, it's how we deploy them, how we use them. So I put our Stockton officers, I'm amazed at the great work they do for how high level of call load they have. And then I mentioned earlier, I'm beginning to get a little concerned with our staffing numbers again, because we're seeing a lot of retirement, self-included, but a lot of our other officers are beginning to retire. So we've got that attrition leaving out the back door of our police department. And we're having difficulty, really just in law enforcement in general, but especially here, getting folks interested in wanting to be police officers. So I hope that the hiring gear winds back up again, and we can start to get more numbers of young officers on the force. But we're just having a lot of officers attriting out, or retiring, or otherwise leaving the police department. So I'm hoping those numbers get back up a little bit.
And during your time, you've decreased net crime, and according to studies, helped community police relations. Looking back, what would you say is your biggest accomplishment as chief?
Yes, I probably the both internal trust and credibility we've worked well in the department with. So, for example, a good relationship with the police union and line level police officers and the sergeants, lieutenants. I feel like I've helped instill a sense of teamwork that has actually, I believe that's why we were so successful in the National Initiative for Building Community Trust and Justice. That was, we were one of 6 pilot sites in the country. That was the largest undertaking by a body of research to really understand what metrics may exist to that you can measure community trust within their police department. And it showed, that study ended up showing we've got a lot of work to do, but we made some excellent improvements, especially when compared to the other pilot sites. So I think that's probably one of the biggest accomplishments, was doing the national initiative, but getting the buy-in from internal staff as well as community. Otherwise, we wouldn't have been able to make it happen.
And are there any regrets that you have, or situations you think you could have handled differently or improved differently?
We can always do, things better. So I always am looking at how could have I maybe approached a certain issue. And I would say, and it's difficult to do, but really getting around the police department more and being able to interact with more of my staff on a regular basis. It's so easy to get, almost tethered to the desk or meeting to meeting to meeting. And I would give, for example, my successor, I would say, make sure you get out from that desk, make sure you carve out a little bit more time to just get around the department and interact more.
What would your message to the residents of the city of Stockton be?
I would say to our community members, continue to support law enforcement officers that are out there every day putting their lives on the line, and to understand the immense challenges that the men and women of the Stockton Police Department are up against, and just be proud that we have officers that continue to want to do this work. So yeah, to the community, I'd say also stay involved, get involved, whether it be through mentoring for our youth, whether it be to support, through the support Stockton Police Foundation, be involved in a neighborhood watch group, just be involved, because we need everybody's all hands on deck for this thing we call shared public safety. It's a lot of work, but it requires all of us working together.
And to your officers, what would your message to them be?
A message to my officers and staff would revolve around this. Thank you. Thank you for the work you do. I appreciate you. I recognize it's often dangerous work. It's sometimes not recognized. Maybe sometimes we feel underappreciated. But just know this community does support us in law enforcement overall. We just don't hear it that often enough. And be safe. Continue to be safe.
Is there anything you'll miss about being chief?
The people, for sure. The internal staff here, as well as a lot of the community members. But I won't necessarily likely miss the 24/7 phone calls, especially when it's often bad news. But I will miss the people, absolutely.
What's it going to feel like when you step out onto Weber or onto Center their last day?
It still hasn't fully soaked in. I won't know until that day comes, but I imagine it will be, it'll obviously be emotional. So it's going to be, every day as my time winds down, I'm staying busy, still working. So I'm really just going to kind of have to see how it is, but I'm sure it'll be back to that bittersweet thing, right? Which is, it's time for me to go and to move on to my next chapter, but I'll definitely miss the job.
And as Jones says, he's still unsure of what exactly he'll do next. Meanwhile, in the police office building just to my side, Chief James Tresca will take the helm of the police department for now. A nationwide search is now underway for a new chief. That appointment will be made by the city manager, and we'll of course have that coverage for that announcement and decision here once it's made. In Stockton, I'm Gabriel Porras. Thanks for watching.